The Altruist Relief Kitchen is a grassroots international humanitarian aid project to provide the basic necessities of existence in the most difficult situations in the world. I want to tell you about why it's unique, how we're redesigning the structure of humanitarian aid from first principles. But to do this, I want to tell you about how the project came to be. I was born in Alaska, grew up in extreme poverty on a school bus, dog mushing in the wintertime, homeless at an early age, traveled the United States, and then came back to Alaska in my early 20s to live in a little log cabin and raise my young daughter, pulling firewood out of the forest to cook on a wood stove, hauling water. This is where I began to visualize how to create a humanitarian project from scratch out of recycled materials. I began by visualizing the transparency and sustainability and efficiency mechanisms that would be necessary for a project like this to avoid some of the systemic flaws inherent in the humanitarian aid sector. Until in history and anthropology class, I began visualizing how to build a better refugee camp, and then just moved all of my possessions down to the United States to begin serving food. Started by buying school buses and teepees off of Craigslist to put all of this gear onto, and then by 2014, setting up in these remote forest festivals, we were making 120-gallon meals on wood fire. Traveling around the country to these remote locations, we learned how to coordinate volunteers and tap mountain springs and filter water, and moving 10,000 pounds of gear into these remote locations on custom wooden carts to set up these kitchens. We then loaded up 1,000-pound meals onto these carts to move them down mountain trails and give them out. After 4 years of prototyping, building the initial kitchen, we moved them down to feed people affected by the hurricanes, starting in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. This was the first year that we connected the two largest teepees together to make the 50-foot field tent that we would move the entire kitchen into. That fall at Standing Rock, we transported a group of self-proclaimed Mardi Gras Indians from the mouth of the Mississippi up to the headwaters to set up a kitchen again. And we donated all of the teepees we'd been carrying around until that point and stayed deep into the winter. That spring is when we built the first prototype of the collapsible stove system that was able to make hundreds of gallons of food in a very short time. Then we moved everything to the Hurricane Harvey site that had decimated the city of Houston in 2017, set up in multiple locations, making several hundred meals a day. We, at one point, tore down the entire kitchen, moved it 100 miles, and then set it back up all in 48 hours while making several hundred meals a day. In total, we made 10,000 free hot meals for the people affected by that hurricane. We then moved everything across the border to Tijuana on the opposite side of the country and set up in a remote desert to feed the women and children in shelters who had traveled across Mexico. By 2020, we had begun to build the finished version of the 12-sided field tent. This was large and washable enough to be a classroom or a community center. It was sterile enough to be a medical facility, and we set it up as this huge field kitchen around this collapsible set of gear and these collapsible wood stoves. We then moved the whole thing over to set it up again in another refugee camp on the opposite side of Mexico. At the beginning of 2022 was the inception of the war in Ukraine. So, leaving the gear behind, I sent myself with just a backpack to the other side of the world by plane, flying into Poland because of it was martial law in Ukraine to take trains into Lviv. This day, by chance, that I had gotten on the train to go into the Ukrainian city of Lviv was the day of the first major missile strikes on that city. So the conductor came around and whispered something urgently in Ukrainian to the crew, to everyone in all of the cars, and they turned out all of the lights and closed all of the blinds and fell completely silent. And that's how we rode into this recently bombed city under martial law in Ukraine in the middle of the night. We had chosen Lviv because it was the bottleneck of the primary humanitarian corridor of refugees leaving the country. It was the most advantageous place to set up and begin the manufacturing of this kitchen from recycled materials. We worked to replicate the entire system that we had created in North America to manufacture it in Ukraine, and ended up setting it up with only people power and pulleys, building it out of recycled drilling equipment. We set up this frame in front of a refugee compound. There was frequent missile strikes in the area, hitting utility and energy infrastructure, causing nationwide blackouts. But we worked on creating this kitchen until deep into the winter. Because there was no power often in the city, there's no electricity, no utilities, the refrigerator doesn't work, the water doesn't work. And then each day going out into the city in a blizzard. After a year of setting up all of the manufacturing and administrative structures of bringing together refugees in the area to create this kitchen, we finally completed it on March of 2023, 1 year after the beginning of the war, and began serving almost 1,000 meals a day. We began by cooking food for the women and children in the apartment complexes surrounding the kitchen, served that food out to them first, and then delivered the remaining food in these recycled stainless steel beer kegs that we cooked the food in. We would load them up into vans and distribute them to shelters around the city. Such that at this point, we've cooked over 250,000 meals for the women and children, elderly and disabled people who have fled the front lines coming to Lviv. So you can see through the development of this kitchen from very humble means to a point where we can make 250,000 meals in an active war zone in Ukraine that is a radically sustainable system, both in the sense that it can be sustained, which is to say that all of the cooking necessary to serve food and the purification of water and heating the entire facility in a blizzard can be done on any available flammable material, but also that it is made almost entirely out of locally sourced, easily available recycled materials. This is a radically efficient system in so many different ways, but you can see that it can be broken down and set back up all with only people power and pulleys in very remote or difficult locations without existing infrastructure. This efficiency, however, is best manifest in showing that we made 127,000 meals in our first year at only 38 cents a piece. You know that we are a radically efficient organization because it is also radically transparent. And we're showing what's happening for every expense. There's a description of every expense made by the organization, and it's matched against receipts, photographs of receipts. So this is here in Ukrainian hryvnias along with the date, but it's matched against the US dollar amount and where it was spent, on what was purchased and who purchased it. We have the who, what, where, when, why of every receipt, of every purchase that's happening so that you can follow every dollar down to its conclusion and then match it against a description of how many meals are made, on what day, where are they taken, what does each meal consist of, who was cooking it, etc. So this information about what's happening to every single dollar and what is being produced exactly with that money, that is a radical level of transparency that doesn't exist in any other organization. So I hope you can see that these sustainability mechanisms, our transparency to show you exactly what's taking place and the efficiency with which to do it, is also the base layer that you need to build a school or a well or a tree planting project. Any community development project requires that you have these sustainability, efficiency, and transparency mechanisms in place. So this is our kitchen in Ukraine, now serving food for the third winter of the war. We are continuing to make 1,000 meals a day and distribute them to shelters around the city when many other aid organizations have already left. We are continuing to serve the women and children, elderly and disabled people who have had to flee the front lines due to this conflict. Moving forward into 2025, we are moving our existing gear that I showed you from the Tijuana project down to the southern Mexico city of Tapachula, where 1/3 of the refugees in Central America are located in this one place. People have come there from all over the continent and from South America and the Caribbean, primarily to seek asylum, fleeing political violence and other things. By setting up in this location, we can relieve the burden of this refugee migration for the residents and help alleviate some of the symptoms of extreme poverty for the refugees themselves. In this way, we hope to set up multiple different tents connected together, one for a kitchen, one as a medical clinic, one for water and sanitation, etc., a dining facility, so that we can provide a range of community services in this location and begin to manufacture more of these kitchens to set up in other places in the region. You can get a hold of us if you have any questions at altruistrelief.org. I appreciate that you would take the time to contemplate what it is that we're doing and ways that you might be able to participate. I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. It's the best way to get more and ongoing information about both what we're doing and on the ground, behind the scenes information about some of these most difficult situations in the world. Thank you for your time.